Does it feel like there's been a huge change at the tight end position in 2025? Because if it feels like it, you're absolutely correct. Last season, there was only one tight end through the first 4 weeks of the season to score 40 or more total points. This season, we have 6 tight ends that have scored more than 40 points so far this season. Last year, tight ends to score more than 30 fantasy points, that number was only 5. In 2025, that number is 14. There will still be inconsistencies that we need to figure out at the tight end position. Some guys are going to have big weeks and then disappear. That is not going to change, but total scoring is way up. And that is going to make this video way more important than it ever has been, because now we have a ton of decisions that we need to make at tight end. For Thursday Night Football with San Francisco and the LA Rams, the big question will be, can George Kittle return next week when his IR stint is officially over? And we'll continue to monitor that through the rest of the week and even next week. But Jake Tonjes is a touchdown-dependent play on Thursday Night Football if you're looking to just shoot for a touchdown. If you don't have a ton of people on waivers, he may still be out there and you could potentially grab a touchdown for him. But that's the only reason that he's a fringe start. That and Ricky Pearsall. He left last week's game, ended up returning, but he is banged up right now. So we'll await a little bit more information on him to see if he can go, because if Pearsall can't go, that's going to make Tonjes super important this week. Tyler Higbee and the Rams have a solid matchup this week. San Francisco is allowing the 8th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. And Tyler Higbee is playing 55% of the snaps, but that's not good enough, especially when you have so many targets going to Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams. You've got Colby Parkinson out there, you've got Allen out there, both of them are playing 30% of the snaps. So for right now, Tyler Higbee, he's going to see a couple of targets here or there every single week. Maybe he ends up finding the end zone every once in a while, but it's not going to be nearly enough when we have so many good tight end options that are on the field way more often. Over in England, we've got another early Sunday morning start. Good thing for the Minnesota Vikings, they're already going to be used to it. But one thing we're really not used to as of yet is TJ Hockenson being basically irrelevant at this point. Yes, he was the tight end for 2 weeks ago because he scored a touchdown, but his finishes outside of that have been tight end 34, 43, and 22. This is one of those calls I could absolutely see biting me in the butt. If you own TJ Hockenson, I would sit him, and I would look for somebody that has way more upside if possible at this point, especially considering the fact that we've got Jordan Addison back for the Minnesota Vikings. Justin Jefferson is obviously going to be the number one target on that team, and they're going to need a third option, but you've got Adam Thielen, you've got Jalen Nailor. Jordan Mason, he's got a tough matchup this week, so maybe they're not going to run the ball nearly as much. I don't love this. I don't love this. But I'm going to go with it because Cleveland right now is allowing the 7th fewest fantasy points per game. And when I look at what TJ Hockenson has done this season, he doesn't deserve to start over some other options that might even still be available on your waiver wire. And you got to think that at any point in time, David Njoku could bite me in the butt for listing him as a sit as well. But what else are we supposed to do with these tight ends? I mentioned it at the beginning of the video. Tight end scoring is up. So there is an opportunity to find guys out there that are doing well. In previous years, when it's like, well, everybody sucks at the tight end position, we might as well start the guys that we know have produced in the past. We don't have to do that anymore. I feel like we can take more risks in 2025, and we can go with some guys that are actually putting up more consistent points. The concern over David Njoku and TJ Hockenson is basically the same because David Njoku has not shown us any upside yet this year, and you'd have to think that they're going to try and get him going at some point in time. Harold Fannin, though, him and David Njoku are really splitting a ton of looks right now. Everyone was like, oh, Harold Fannin, he's playing out in the slot. Him and David Njoku's play out in the slot is basically even. David Njoku this past week played 84% of the snaps. Harold Fannin actually passed him finally. He's at 85% of the snaps, and at least he has has a top 12 finish at this point. How do you start either of these guys? The only reason I'm going to go with Harold Fannin is because this is such a tough matchup for the wide receivers. But based on how this entire offense played last week against Detroit, I don't know if I trust any of them. But there's going to be some guys that I mentioned throughout this video that I truly believe could end up having a little bit more upside than either of these guys. So if you have a stud or a former stud that you have been putting in your lineup and you're sick and tired of it, listen to the rest of the video for a few options that could still be out there for you. They're going to be risky, but they've got more upside. Las Vegas and Indianapolis is a great game to watch for those of you that love tight ends as much as I do, with Brock Bowers and Tyler Warren going after it. Here's the thing though. There's no better matchup in this video than this one to talk about our friends over at Tushy. Because like I've mentioned before, I love tight ends. I am constantly talking about them, and y'all have given me the nickname is the tight end whisperer because I've made so many great calls over the years at the tight end position. But for as good as I am with tight ends, Tushy is even better. And if you're looking for somebody to help you take care of your tight end, no, I'm not talking about the football kind. That's my job. Our friends over at Tushy can absolutely help you out with that. And if you head on over to their website, there is a link in the description down below. You can get 15% off your entire order on their website by using code HEADLINERS at checkout. If there's anybody out there that loves a tight end more than your boy here at the Fantasy Headliners or Tushy, I dare you to tag them in the comment section down below because I guarantee they don't. Brock Bowers was solid last week. We have not seen his ceiling as of yet, but you have to hope that it's going to come pretty soon. 6 targets, 5 receptions, 46 yards last week. But when you got a quarterback turning the ball over 3 times, it kills everybody's upside, so I get it. Tyler Warren's got himself a fantastic matchup, though. Las Vegas is currently allowing the 5th most fantasy points to the tight end position. And last week, Tyler Warren finally found the end zone, but with a rushing touchdown. But we knew that could happen. We talked about how he was utilized at Penn State the last couple of years. He goes into the backfield. He'll play fullback. He'll do direct snaps, tons of things like that. So I hope we start to see a lot more of that with Tyler Warren. But he's been fantastic to begin the year. 70 or more receiving yards in 3 of his 4 games so far, and 3 top 7 finishes at the tight end position. For the New York Giants and the New Orleans Saints, we're going to talk about one of my first streaming under the radar tight end options that you could start this week, and it's Theo Johnson. And I want to make one thing clear real fast. I am not trying to tell you that he is some must-start top 12 option right away. I'm not. But if you've been around this channel for a while now, at least a year, you have heard me mention Theo Johnson, and you have heard me talk about how he could be a true game-changing weapon in this offense if they would just utilize him correctly. And with the unfortunate injury to Malik Neighbors, now is the time for Theo Johnson to step up. Now, will there be some risk with it? Absolutely there will be. We haven't seen him with a consistent role in this offense. We've got a rookie quarterback in Jackson Dart, so we haven't really seen who he's going to lock into as of yet. But Theo Johnson did tie for the team lead in targets with 5 last week after Malik Neighbors ended up going down. Did he do a ton with those targets? No, he caught 3 for 17 yards, but he did have a touchdown. And that's where I like Theo Johnson the most to start, in the red zone. Find Theo Johnson, give us some touchdown upside. Then know what? After that, exploit him a little bit. Exploit him against the defenses that are going to have trouble keeping up with him. When you've got guys like Darius Slayton, Wan'Dale Robinson, and hopefully Cam Skattebo can get going in the running game. And if Cam Skattebo cannot get going in the running game, Theo Johnson becomes even more important at that point because they're going to have to move the ball even if it is in short spurts. So, is it Theo Johnson time? Quite possibly. And I think things are going to add up correctly for him. But it's football, and we don't know without being in the locker room exactly how anything will go on any given week. So let's be a little bit cautious here. If you've got a guy like David Njoku, like TJ Hawkinson, and you don't think that they're giving you upside this week, risk it with Theo Johnson. Is that risk any worse than what we've seen from those guys as of yet? If you don't feel like taking that much risk, then still play those guys. It's absolutely fine. But I would pick up Theo Johnson if you own one of these underperforming vets and just keep him on your roster just in case it does become something we can go with every week. A little bit of a down performance last week for Juwan Johnson, but it's not going to worry me that much at this point. Yep, he only saw 3 targets, but in the 3 weeks leading up to that, he was averaging basically 10 targets per game. He's got a solid matchup this week. I'm back on board. He's definitely going to be in my lineup if I don't have one of the top guys like Trey McBride or Brock Bowers. Dallas and the New York Jets. Jake Ferguson, man, I am glad I bought into him for a second consecutive season. This guy is super talented, and I'm glad Dallas is finally utilizing him that way. After catching all 7 of his targets last week for 40 yards and a touchdown, he's now the tight end 2 on the season. And he leads all tight ends with 39 targets. But more importantly, he's 4th among all players in targets, regardless of the position. Jake Ferguson, to me right now, is a top tier tight end option. Slow me down, chat. Tell me in the comments if you need me to slow down, because my boy Mason Taylor, he had a solid week. Caught 5 of his 7 targets for 65 yards. And that's nothing to get super excited about unless you're a Mason Taylor truther and you've spent 3 weeks being very upset with the New York Jets about how they are utilizing him. We're going to be cautious for now, and we're going to be cautious with him just for the concern of it's Justin Fields, it's the New York Jets. We don't know what we're going to get. It's a great matchup against Dallas this week, though, so he definitely needs to be back on our radars. Is he a must start for me? No, but he's definitely a guy that I would consider over other options. The main reason for that, though, is like a guy like Theo Johnson is listed as a start because I think he's got touchdown potential. I don't think Mason Taylor is nearly the red zone threat that a guy like Theo Johnson is. To me, Mason Taylor is somebody that's going to do most of his work in between the 20s, and that's where he has to fight with Garrett Wilson for those targets. So because of that, he's a little bit lower on my rankings based purely off the standpoint I don't think he has as much touchdown upside, and he's got to compete with Garrett Wilson. For Denver and Philadelphia, this may not be the week that Evan Engram gets it going. And at this point, if you own Evan Engram, you probably feel like you're never going to see a fantasy viable performance out of him. And I get that. And I would be willing to bet there's going to be a lot of questions on this video about whether or not you should drop Evan Engram. So let's address it right now. There's definitely some good and some bad when it comes to Evan Engram right now. One of the bad things, on Monday Night Football, he only played 43% of the snaps, while Adam Troutman led the way for tight ends, playing 52% of the snaps. You don't love seeing that. However, Evan Engram still saw 7 targets, so he was up there when it came to total targets on the team. So a bad thing and a good thing. Another bad thing, clearly he hasn't produced and he's been injured this season. So we don't know at this point, maybe he's still not fully healthy. Sean Payton made it sound like he was fully healthy and he was ready to go. But then that's where some of the good comes back into it, because depending on what you believe from Sean Payton, he's made it known that he feels like this offense can be way different with Evan Engram. It could also be the fact that just whatever the score of the game was, maybe they didn't want to keep Evan Engram out there nearly as much because they want to give him another week. They want to ramp him back up. Basically, at this point with Evan Engram, do I want to drop him? No, I don't. Because at some point this season, I think we're still going to get a guy that we can consistently start at the tight end position, and that's going to have a solid floor and a solid ceiling. However, as of right now, I don't think you can play him until you start to see that. So if you have Evan Engram on your roster, what I would do is I would hopefully have enough room on my bench to stash him for right now. And some of these guys I'm talking about, Theo Johnson, Mason Taylor, we're going to talk about Tommy Tremble here in a second. Those type of players, maybe try to roll with some of those guys for the next couple of weeks while Evan Engram builds himself back up. And then at that point, maybe we can go back to Evan Engram. But in this matchup going up against Philadelphia, allowing the 3rd fewest fantasy points per game, he will not be starting. And here's the thing, I don't want to start Dallas Goedert either. And you probably, if you own Dallas Goedert, you're probably thinking to yourself, what? Come on, Kyle, we're going to put him in there. This dude is scoring touchdowns, and I get it. But when you take a look at the numbers over the last 2 weeks, he's been inside the top 12 both games because he has 3 touchdowns. But when you take a look at the numbers over the last 2 weeks, he's only had 6 targets, and he's caught 5 of them for 70 yards. Do we keep betting on touchdowns, or do we go with some guys that we think might have a little bit more volume? That's where you have to decide what your lineup can take. If you can risk it for the touchdowns, go with Dallas Goedert. If you need to grab somebody that you feel like could have more volume, then maybe Goedert should be on the bench this week. And by the way, the Broncos are currently allowing the 6th fewest fantasy points per game to the tight end position, mostly because they have not allowed a receiving touchdown to one as of yet. Before we hop into the Miami and Carolina matchup, I want to take you down a trip of memory lane really quickly, back to 2019. This was about the time that our community here at the Fantasy Headliners, which was not nearly as big as it is right now, gave me the nickname of Tight End Whisperer because I was calling breakout candidates and weekly start and sit candidates at the tight end position pretty consistently. Well, there was one guy back in 2019 that I didn't hear a lot of conversation about. And I felt like on social media, on YouTube, wherever you looked, that I was beating the drum pretty loudly for this guy. And there was only one other person I heard talking about him, and it was Matthew Berry. Now, I've met Matthew Berry in person. I like him. I think he's a good dude. I've had a chance to have some awesome conversations with him. Nothing against Matthew Berry, but I know that some of you out there are not huge fans of him. So back when, I mentioned this, people are like, oh, Matthew Berry likes him. No, I'm off of him. We ended up being pretty correct about Darren Waller. He didn't have a ton of touchdowns, but he had over 1,000 receiving yards that season. And he was a consistent cog in fantasy lineups for people that either got him off waivers or picked him up in drafts super late. So seeing Darren Waller come back and score a couple of touchdowns, I'm all for it. I'm rooting for Darren Waller. I know I made a couple of jokes about him taking time off and doing his rap stuff and things like that because we like to keep things light. We like to keep things fun, but Darren Waller's back, and he is a guy that I'll always remember is a huge breakout call that I made. And in this business, you remember guys like that. Darren Waller, for me, with no Tyreek Hill and 2 touchdowns in his first game back, you got to assume that he's going to have a pretty big role in this offense moving forward. And this week, he gets a solid matchup with Carolina giving up the 6th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Carolina's got a solid matchup themselves as well. Miami's allowing the 3rd most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. Now, the expectation is that Ja'Tavion Sanders is probably going to miss a few weeks. So I expect Tommy Tremble to be the tight end one once again. And I get that both Tremble and Evans scored a touchdown last week. But when you take a look at the snap percentage, it's clearly Tremble. He was at 75%, while Evans was at 54%, and Mitchell was at 25%. And because of that, Tommy Tremble has got touchdown potential once again this week. Dalton Schultz was super close to finding himself in the sit column this week. And the only reason that I'm not doing it is because Houston's going up against Baltimore. Now, if for some reason Lamar Jackson does end up missing this week and his hamstring is a lot worse than what it was originally reported, then at that point, I don't like Dalton Schultz nearly as much because I don't find the Baltimore offense to be nearly as intimidating. So for me right now, he's a fringe start. If Lamar Jackson is playing, this Baltimore offense will be fine. They're going to put up some points, and more than likely, Houston's going to have to play catch up. But if he doesn't play, Dalton Schultz, I don't think is nearly as important to a team that's going to run the ball way more and may not be in negative game script nearly as much as what we think. So keep an eye out for this for the rest of the week and see what happens with Lamar Jackson. Dalton Schultz had 6 targets last week. We're going to leave him as a fringe start right now, but that could change fast. Mark Andrews and Baltimore are going to have a tough matchup this week. Houston is allowing the 6th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. However, Mark Andrews fooled us once again, right? Because back in 2024, he was terrible to start the season. Everybody dropped him, and the dude absolutely explodes. And he started off 2025 the same way. He only had 4 targets through the first 2 games of the season. 4 targets in 2 games, 2 catches, and 7 yards. And then all of a sudden, over the last couple of weeks, he's caught 13 of 14 targets for 121 yards and 2 touchdowns. Realistically, the reason I'm going with Mark Andrews here is because Lamar Jackson, if his hamstring is bothering him, he may not be getting outside the pocket and running nearly as much, which might mean a few more quick passes to Mark Andrews. If Lamar Jackson doesn't play, Mark Andrews could also be a safety blanket as well. Tennessee and Arizona is going to leave us on 2 opposite ends of the spectrum here. The top end being Trey McBride for Arizona, who we are currently playing, and he has a solid matchup against Tennessee, who's currently allowing the 8th most fantasy points per game. Nothing else that I need to say about Trey McBride. But on the other end of the spectrum, we have Chig Okonkwo, who isn't doing anything. He's really only going to be fantasy viable in matchups where they clearly benefit him. And at this point, this offense just is not playing well, and I expect them to run the ball quite a bit this week because Arizona's had issues stopping the run. This is why we don't start Cade Otton, because last week it was like, oh, Mike Evans isn't going to play, and Cade Otton plays 90% of the snaps, so he is a good option. We can throw him. No, he's not, ladies and gentlemen. I don't think we should ever start Cade Otton. The only way we're starting Cade Otton is if Mike Evans and Emeka Egbuka and Chris Godwin are all missing, because it's ridiculous at this point. And this is a great matchup against Seattle, who's allowing the most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. Cade Otton has a legit chance to find the end zone this week, but I don't care. It's Emeka Egbuka. It's Chris Godwin. Bucky Irving, if he's healthy, is getting work in the passing game. Rachaad White's going to get work in the passing game if Bucky Irving isn't fully healthy this week. Cade Otton's playing 90% of snaps, and he's not doing anything to warrant any consideration to be in your fantasy lineup. I really wanted to put AJ Barner as a fringe option this week, and he's got a couple of touchdowns on the season, and he's playing 86% of the offensive snaps. But while Barner's being looked at in the red zone, Elijah Arroyo, who's playing 55% of the snaps, is seeing some routes that are leading him to bigger big play potential, if you want to say it that way. That probably didn't come out correctly, but I don't care. Elijah Arroyo is just kind of cutting into that upside of AJ Barner. So because of that, as much as I want him to become a thing as well, I don't think it's something that we want to roll with as of right now until we see it more consistently. When you're on an offense as good as the Detroit Lions and you're going up against a team allowing the 5th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends, you are clearly a must start, right? Right? No. And that's the life of Sam Laporta, because Sam Laporta is going to have some huge games, and he absolutely could have a huge game this week. I am not saying to sit Sam Laporta whatsoever, but I want you all to know right now, Amon-Ra St. Brown will be the main guy. And then we are going to see a heck of a running game from Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, because Cincinnati can't stop the run at all. They just allowed over 150 rushing yards to J.K. Dobbins and R.J. Harvey. I expect a ton of running the football. I expect Amon-Ra St. Brown. I expect a little Sam Laporta mixed in. But if Detroit's killing Cincinnati at halftime, Sam Laporta is not going to see his upside. And for Cincinnati, I literally have absolutely nothing to discuss when it comes to their tight ends. Jake Browning can't even get the football to all-world talent Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Why in the world would I think he's going to get the football to anybody else on this team? What about Zach Ertz this week? Well, there's been a little bit of a problem the last couple of weeks with him, and that might be because it's Marcus Mariota playing and not Jaden Daniels. So maybe Zach Ertz is a little bit safer if we find out that Jaden Daniels will play this week. But as of now, he's going to be a fringe start, because with Jaden Daniels, his first 2 weeks of the season, he had 13 targets, 9 receptions, 90 receiving yards, and a touchdown. He was the tight end 9 and the tight end 2. The last 2 weeks with Marcus Mariota, he's had 7 targets. He's caught 5 of them for 59 yards. He hasn't found the end zone. He's been the tight end 24 each game. If Mariota plays, I probably sit Zach Ertz. If Jaden Daniel plays, I probably consider Zach Ertz as a start at that point. Y'all kept asking him for him last week, and I told you all, as soon as he is the tight end 1 or tight end 2 in terms of snap percentage, Oronda Gadsden will be on the start and sit video. And here he is. He was the tight end 1 last week in terms of snap percentage. He jumped all the way up to 48%, which led the tight ends. Tucker Fisk was at 21. Conklin dropped all the way to 19%. Now, he only saw 3 targets last week, so he was not fantasy viable, but I'm going to put him as a fringe start this week because in this matchup against Washington, who are allowing the 7th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, he could end up seeing a little bit more work, and we'll see if that 48% jumps at all. I'm not running out there to start Gadsden right away, but I definitely want to have him on my fantasy team over the next couple of weeks to see what happens. If you're an OG subscriber of the Fantasy Headliners, I'm talking like 4 or 5 years here, something like that, you'll remember that our live show used to kick off with a video of Hunter Henry welcoming everybody to Headliner Nation. That was a long time ago, back when he was with the Chargers. I think maybe after his rookie year was when we did that. I don't know, but we were huge Hunter Henry fans. So to have that as our opener was so cool. And I've been a Hunter Henry fan every year since. I just don't feel like offenses have ever used him correctly. And maybe, just maybe, New England is finally doing that. I still think you're going to have a ton of inconsistencies, and I think you saw that even last year with Hunter Henry after Drake May took over. He's going to have some pretty big games, and then he's going to have some games where he's just not being looked at. This isn't a great matchup. Buffalo's allowing the second fewest fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, but he's been the tight end 1 and the tight end 7 the last couple of weeks. Now, last week, he only had 2 targets, and the week before, he had 11 targets. Now, luckily, he's found the end zone the last couple of weeks, which has definitely helped him. But that's where things become an issue, right? If we're going from 11 targets to 2, to 7, to 3, to 10, to 1, we're going to see that with Hunter Henry. So if you're starting him consistently, you just have to know that there is always going to be some risk with him. With Dalton Kincaid, I think it's going to be a lot of the same way this season for him. He's going to have some games where he's going to have really solid games because he scores a touchdown. But then he's going to have games where he doesn't have a solid game because he doesn't score a touchdown. When you take a look at Dalton Kincaid, he's got a matchup this week with New England, allowing the 9th most fantasy points per game. So we want to lock into that. If you own Dalton Kincaid, then this is the type of week where you start him and you don't feel awful about it. But last week he scored again, and he only had 2 targets. I mean, he only has 1 game this season where he had over 50 receiving yards. And so far he's had 4, 6, 6, and 2 targets. But he's got 3 touchdowns in 4 games. And that's what is pushing his fantasy value right now. If we can get him 6 targets per game, that's great. But if you can't get him 6 targets per game, he's going to be ultra touchdown dependent. And if he doesn't get the touchdown, you're not going to love the numbers that you get. For Kansas City and Jacksonville, we're going to stick with Travis Kelce as a start. His floor this year has been very solid. It's not very high, but it's been very solid. And his ceiling isn't all that high either. But with them getting healthy right now, if we can keep Travis Kelce at about 5 targets per game, his upside will tick up a little bit because he's going to have more big play opportunity. Why? Hollywood Brown, Xavier Worthy, Rashee Rice when he's back in a couple of weeks, Tyquan Thornton. We've got a lot of speed, a lot of field stretchers, and a lot of guys that work really well over the middle of the field. And because of that, that's going to open up some things for Travis Kelce, who will get some mismatches with linebackers, and we'll see a little bit more upside because he could probably break those targets for some bigger plays than what we've seen recently. And then for Britton Strange, he's going to be a fringe start for me. Last week, he had 7 targets and caught 6 of them for 45 yards, but this is a much tougher matchup. Kansas City is allowing the 4th fewest fantasy points per game to the opposing tight end position, and I'm just not in love with what Britton Strange has done so far this season because I feel like this offense as a whole is just really unknown right now. And I think there's a lot of up and downs, and Britton Strange is going to be a guy that he's going to see a decent amount of targets sometimes, but I think he's going to disappear other times as well. And I don't think that he has nearly the touchdown upside as some other guys that we've talked about. Tight ends in the book, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully everybody enjoyed this episode of the Fantasy Headliners, and hopefully you all enjoyed me talking about tight ends for a little while you try to decide who's going to be in your lineup and who's not going to be in your lineup. And if this video helped you set your lineup, let me know down in the comments below. But if you still have a ton of questions, you should also let me know down in the comments below. And if you appreciate the content, make sure you hype the video, make sure you subscribe if you are new here, and make sure you also turn on that bell notification. Anytime we drop new content, you'll know about it right away. But for now, Headliner Nation, I'm gonna get out of here. I'm gonna go eat some lunch, and then I'm gonna get working on wide receivers. So peace out, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliner.